If we're committed to developing a genuinely communal ontology, then we must discover a method of approaching the mystery of existence that's consistent with the logic of communion. We must discover a communal epistemology that allows us to see the world through communal eyes. The first thing that we must do is determine the various players already on the scene before we even begin our investigation into the true nature of being. Since communion signifies unity in distinction, we have a prima facie reason to believe that there are multiple distinct aspects or sides of existence that exist together in a relationship of mutual interiority. In fact, I believe there's precisely 3 sides of our being that we must take into account. But what does it even mean for there to be 3 sides of being? How can existence have distinct sides or aspects? The answer lay in the communal nature of being, the fact that the essence of identity is not self-relation or self-referentiality, but union with and movement towards the other. Let's unpack this. So there's 3 sides of our existence, all of which are united in the fact that they are gifts from God. Hence, all 3 sides of our existence, that is, our created being, are distinct yet necessarily in relation to God. So here are the 3 sides of existence. 1, our own being. 2, the other's being, and 3, the actualization or revelation of the union between ourselves and the other. Why is it necessary to make this threefold distinction? The answer to this question is central to our task of developing a communal ontology that takes seriously the revelation of the triune God as the creator. Let's begin with our own being. We are distinct persons, or hypostases, and in a sense, we are absolute or singular. Saint Sophrony says this in his spiritual autobiography, We Shall See Him as He Is. We are each absolute insofar as we have the power of self-determination. We choose in the end who we are. Likewise, we're each centers of the world insofar as we're the perspective or the point from which we engage with the world. We must note that since we are the point from which we engage the world, we must always stand in relation to the world, or what the philosophers call the other. The other signifies something distinct from yet standing in relation to us. The other is the one we are oriented towards, the end towards which our active being is directed. As we've said, all 3 sides of our being are mutually interior and mutually implying, so that it's not even logical to speak of an isolated person who's not always already standing in a positive relation to another. Rather, from the very beginning of our existence, we are distinct persons acting in relation to and in union with others. Our activity is what the fathers of the church call our energy, which is a term taken from Aristotelian metaphysics and is closest to the English term actuality. Our actuality is our being. It signifies our irreducibly distinct personal existence as it's actualized in relation to others. The key point here is that our activity, which is our being, is always a directed movement, that is, a relation. A relation implies both unity and distinction, and the fullest realization of relation is identical to the fullest development of one's distinct self and or in and through one's union with the other. This is so because we are created in the image of the Holy Trinity. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are irreducibly distinct but fully united in their mutual interiority. This mutual interiority consists of the 3 persons performing the same activity or energy in their respective hypostatic modes. The Father, Son, and Spirit each love with the same love, but the Father loves in a paternal way, the Son in a filial way, and the Spirit in a spiritual way. Each engages in and possesses the same energy or actuality, but this energy is only actualized in and through the Trinitarian communion, wherein each person expresses the divine nature in their irreducibly unique, that is, hypostatic ways. Since all the energies of God are actualized in communion, they are identical to the 3 persons energizing or acting in and through one another from all eternity. Since we are created by God, our being is absolutely contingent upon Him. Thus, to receive the fullness of life, we must enter into communion with Him. Christ is the way, the truth, and the life because we are created as sons of God who are destined for adoption as sons. Our own activity or energy or actuality begins and ends in the eternal Son, as we can only exist in relation to God. God first creates us from nothing, and the further cultivation and perfection of our contingent being is only possible through the development or consummation of the relation that is our being from the get-go. Our creation from nothing is the beginning of our existence as a distinct being from God. But since distinction always implies relation, we know that our being is only fully realized in our relation to God. Christ is the only way to the Father because the very meaning of our being, in its fullest ontological sense, is the actualization of our relation to the Father as adopted sons, which occurs in our being united to the eternal Son through the Spirit. In being united to the eternal Son, who is the only true way, we take on the same mode of relation to the Father that he has by nature. The Father first moves towards the Son as the monarchia of the Godhead, and the Son reciprocates this movement in turn. As sons of God, we are meant to engage in the same relation in a creaturely mode, which consists of the synergy of our activities with the activities of God. This synergy is realized through our entrance into the Son's inner life, wherein we share in his eternal act of reciprocating the Father's original movement towards him. We can now return to discussing the three sides of being. The first side is our own being as a distinct hypostasis or person brought forth from nothing by God. The second side is the other, which includes the entirety of the world outside of us and most significantly other persons, and of course, God himself. The third side we have yet to discuss is the revelation or actualization of the union between self and other, a union which occurs in God. A monohypostatic reality is incoherent, as being is always being in relation to another. But a dual hypostatic reality is also incoherent, because the relation of two alone does not allow for the revelation or actualization of relation and communion. Take, for example, two corporeal objects. They always stand in relation to one another, and they do so precisely because they are united in space. The relation between the two cannot be attributed to either of them as isolated identities, which means that there is a third element present, which is the principle of their union. If two objects are moving towards one another in space, they'll eventually collapse into each other. But if they are brought together and then move outwards into three-dimensional space, they can, theoretically, continue to fill this space infinitely. Just as the Spirit of God is the third in whom the communion of the two is actualized and revealed, according to the Bible, it is this same Spirit who unites all creatures to God and to each other. In ourselves, we possess no capacity for relation with the other. Think about this carefully. If we isolate ourselves at any point in time, nothing about this self alone allows for any change whatsoever. The only way I can relate to another person, which is synonymous with existing at all, is if I transcend myself towards this other. And this power of self-transcendence, or ekstasis in Greek, is not an intrinsic power of creaturely being, just as nothing alone could never become something. There is, of course, a sense in which it is I who engages in the act of self-transcendence, but the power behind it remains a mystery, since there's nothing in me to which this can be attributed to in the ultimate sense. The truth is that the power of self-transcendence is not within any creature alone. The tricky part of all of this is that we always already exist in a web of relations with others. So, strictly speaking, it makes no sense to speak of ourselves in isolation. Even when we isolate ourselves conceptually as some sort of virtual distinction, everything that has been isolated only exists insofar as it is in relation to the world and to God. So even if you use your power of self-determination right now to think of a random word, you only did so because you're watching this video, and you can only think of a word because you received language through your socialization. Once we begin to think through the relations that constitute our existence, we realize that the entirety of the created world is a relational network where everything has a positive and intelligible connection to every other thing. But every created thing only ever exists in relation to each other. Nothing in creation can, in the ultimate and primary sense, facilitate the communion between creatures. Nothing possesses the gift of existence in themselves, precisely because it is a gift of the other. If every creature is contingent upon others, then there must be a non-contingent first giver who, at every moment, gives the gift of being that we all share between ourselves. We can only give the gift to the other creature and vice versa, insofar as we have both received it in the ultimate sense from God. Thus, it's God himself, the first relation who isn't contingent upon the created network of relations, who facilitates the union of self and other. The key point I'm trying to make is that the threefold distinction between self, other, and the realization of this union is necessary to comprehend being, as being is the unity in distinction of these three sides. With the self alone, there can be no being, as the self only ever exists in relation to another. With the self and the other alone, there can also be no being, as they are always united in and through something distinct from them. In the context of human beings who are spiritually united to one another, this is only possible because we are united in the Spirit. Just as the Spirit is the giver of life, according to the Nicene Creed, the creator of both self and other, this same Spirit is the one who unites the self and other together in Him. He draws us forth from nothing precisely by uniting us to God and the world, by placing us in relation to other creatures and Himself. Thus, from the very beginning, our being consists of God's creation of ourselves, His creation of other selves for us to know, and His realization of the union between us and other selves. The first and most essential point is that God is the creator of all three sides of our being, so that we can't say that God takes a pre-existing being and subsequently puts it in relation with Him and others. If one is familiar with the communal ontology, one is able to recognize that this isn't even a coherent idea, as it implies that there is any being prior to and separate from relation. The second point is that the three sides of being aren't three separate realities, but the three sides of God's creative act, all equally necessary and mutually implying. The self exists as singular and, in a sense, absolute and distinct from all others, about whom St. Augustine once said, God loves each of us as if there were only one of us. But the self only ever exists in relation to another, and this relation is only possible in the third, who is distinct from, yet contains the two. Thus, 3 is the number of being itself, as being is synonymous with revealed relation, that is, communion.